I returned home unannounced and found my daughter alone fighting for her life in the ICU. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the soft, sleepy quiet that usually wrapped our house at night, but a hollow, echoing silence that made every sound I made, my keys on the table, my shoes on the tiles, feel like an intrusion. I had come home 2 days early from my work trip, planning to surprise my family. I'd imagined my daughter's eye roll when I swept her into a hug and my wife's half-smile as she pretended she wasn't happy to see me. Instead, the house greeted me like a stranger. "Amna," I called, peering into the living room. Her hoodie was slumped on the back of the couch. A mug, half-finished tea, sat cold on the table. A faint smell of burned toast lingered. "Zara," I tried louder this time. No answer. I checked the bedrooms, then the backyard. Nothing. The dog whined beside the empty food bowl, as if he'd been waiting longer than usual. That's when the cold thread of worry wound itself around my spine. Something was wrong. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I saw Zara's name flashing on the screen, I felt a rush of relief. "Where are you?" I laughed shakily, trying to sound normal. "I'm home, Her voice broke through, fragmented and trembling. "Come to City Medical, ICU, please." The rest dissolved into static and sobs. My keys hit the floor. I didn't even bother picking them up. I don't remember the drive. Only the lights streaking past like comets, my heart hammering a drumbeat against my ribs, and my brain repeating the same word over and over like a prayer. "Please, please, please." The ICU smelled like antiseptic and endings. Machines beeped in measured heartbeats. Nurses moved with quiet urgency. And there, at the end of a row of glass-walled rooms, was my daughter. My Amna. 17 years old, too young for tubes and wires, and the stillness that wrapped around her like a shroud. Her chest rose and fell beneath the ventilator's rhythm. Her face, usually flushed with a stubborn, fiery life, looked pale and fragile, almost translucent. Her thick black hair was tied back loosely, strands falling across her forehead. For a moment, my legs refused to move. Not like this. Not my little girl who used to run barefoot in the yard, who'd painted constellations on her ceiling, who'd argued fiercely about everything from curfews to climate change. Not the girl whose laughter still echoed in the halls when the house was quiet. My wife stood beside her, one hand resting over Amna's, her back rigid, her eyes red and exhausted. She turned when she heard me, shock widening her face before it crumpled. "You're early," she whispered, almost apologetically, as if my timing had upset a fragile balance. I crossed the room in 3 steps and took her into my arms. She shook, her sobs hot against my shoulder. "What happened?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer was something I should have known, something I had missed. She swallowed. "Overdose." The word hit me like a physical blow. "No," I said automatically. "No, she wouldn't, Amna wouldn't." But the machines behind her kept beeping in steady agreement with the truth. Hours blurred into shadows and fluorescent light. Doctors came and went, their voices a mixture of technical terms and guarded reassurance. Stable for now, monitoring closely, unknown neurological impact. I sat at Amna's bedside, gripping her hand gently, afraid that if I held on too tight she might slip further away. I tried to remember the last real conversation we'd had. Not a rushed "did you finish your homework?" shouted through a doorway, not a distracted "we'll talk later," a real, honest conversation. I couldn't. Guilt seeped into me like ink into water. When she had started wearing long sleeves in summer, I'd teased her about being dramatic. When her grades slipped, I'd blamed her phone. When she spent more time alone, I'd assumed it was just teenage moodiness. And all the while, she had been sinking deeper into a darkness I'd never bothered to look for. "Why didn't we see?" I whispered. My wife sighed, eyes fixed on the slow rise and fall of our daughter's chest. "We saw," she said, just not clearly enough. Zara arrived later, breathless, her scarf askew, guilt flashing through her eyes when she saw me. "I tried to call you," she said. "I know," my voice cracked. "I'm here now." She nodded and took the chair on the other side of Amna's bed, her fingers tracing the outline of her sister's wrist, careful not to disturb the IV line. The three of us sat there in silence, a fractured family pulled together by the weight of what we might lose. When visiting hours ended, the nurse gently suggested we rest. My wife went home to shower and gather clothes. Zara collapsed on a waiting room couch. I stayed. I couldn't leave her. Around midnight, a young nurse with kind eyes slipped into the room with a blanket and draped it over my shoulders. "Talk to her," she said softly. "They say hearing is the last thing to go." So I talked. I told Amna about the first time I'd held her, the way she'd wrapped her tiny fingers around mine as if claiming ownership. I told her about the scraped knees I'd kissed better, the bedtime stories I'd pretended not to enjoy as much as she did. I told her about the dreams I'd had for her, the future I'd assumed she'd walk into easily. And then eventually, I told her the truth. "I wasn't there," I whispered, tears finally spilling unchecked. "Not really, I was working, I was tired, I was always somewhere else, and I thought you were strong, I thought you didn't need me." Her fingers didn't move, her eyelids didn't flutter. But the silence between us felt thicker with confession. "I'm here now," I promised, though the words felt fragile. "If you come back to me, I swear I will listen. I will learn how to be the father you needed instead of the one I thought I should be." Outside, a storm began, rain tapping against the window like impatient fingers. Inside, machines continued to measure life in numbers and beeps. The next day, the truth began to unravel. Her friend Miriam came, her face pale, guilt etched into every word. "She didn't mean to," she said. "It wasn't like that. She'd been struggling, panic attacks, insomnia. She didn't tell you because she thought you wouldn't understand." My chest tightened. Was she wrong? She told us about the pills, sleeping tablets taken from a friend's older sister. About the night Amna had confessed, she sometimes felt like she was drowning in expectations she couldn't meet. About the way she laughed it off a second later, calling herself dramatic. And I remembered each time I'd told her to toughen up, to stop overthinking, to be grateful. Words that now felt like stones in my mouth. The doctors told us it would take time, that we had to wait. So we waited. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. I barely left her side. I watched other families cycle through, joyful reunions, quiet grief, empty beds that would never be filled again. I prayed, though I'd long stopped believing prayer changed anything but the person praying. I prayed anyway. On the fourth day, a change. A flutter. So slight I thought I imagined it. Her fingers moved. "Amna," I said, sitting forward so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Her eyelids trembled, then slowly, painfully they opened. Those brown eyes, so familiar, so achingly alive, blinked against the sterile light. The nurse rushed in. My wife and Zara were called. Tears and laughter tangled together into a messy symphony of relief. She was back. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough for hope to slip quietly back into the room. Recovery was not a straight line. There were days she was quiet, her eyes shadowed with something I didn't yet understand. There were days she joked like nothing had happened. There were nights I heard her crying softly into her pillow and hated myself for every missed sign. We started therapy together and separately. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick. She told us about the pressure she felt, to be perfect, to be fine, to carry the unspoken weight of our expectations. She told us about anxiety that clawed at her chest in the dark, and the loneliness of feeling unseen in a house full of people. And I told her about my father, about how love in his world was measured in discipline and rules and silent sacrifice, how I had mistaken fear for respect and distance for strength, how I had passed those lessons on without meaning to. We learned each other again. Slowly, patiently, honestly. I stopped asking, "What's wrong with you?" and started asking, "What are you carrying that I can help hold?" We built rituals. Evening tea without phones. Walks without expectations. Conversations without judgment. Sometimes we failed. Sometimes we snapped at each other. Sometimes old habits slithered back in. But we kept trying. Months later, we returned to the hospital, this time with flowers and gratitude instead of fear. Amna insisted on visiting the nurses who had cared for her. They hugged her like a miracle they had helped create. On the way out, we passed the ICU waiting room, and I saw a man sitting alone, head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. For a moment I saw myself in him, lost, terrified, drowning in regret. I wanted to tell him everything I had learned. That love is not assumption. That silence is not strength. That sometimes the people we think are fine are the ones fighting battles we never bothered to see. But instead, I walked past quietly, holding my daughter's hand a little tighter. Because I had learned, finally, that presence speaks louder than advice. Moral of the story: never assume silence means strength. The people you love may be fighting invisible battles, ones that need your patience, your attention, and your willingness to truly listen. Love is not just being there when everything falls apart. It's choosing to be present long before it does.